Hey, this is Joe from Home Studio Corner. If mixing vocals intimidates you or frustrates you, I want to help today in this video by walking through a quick vocal mix. I have a feeling I could do a vocal mixing video once a week for a year, and there would still be stuff for us to learn because A, vocals are that important, and B, vocals are kind of fickle. Every person's voice is different, and then with the same singer, I've mixed my own voice hundreds of times, hundreds of different recordings, and each one is a little bit different, depending on the weather, what's happening in my sinuses, whether I have pants on or not, which, by the way, you can't tell if I have pants on or not right now, and that just makes me happy. Anyway, let's dive in. So here is a song of mine. This is the mixed instrumental track, so this is already mixed, and we're going to drop the dry vocal on top. That's typically how I like to work, get a great sounding instrumental, and then make the vocal sit on top. It's not the right way. There's not really a wrong way, but this is the way I like to do it. And I'm going to walk you through the quick little couple of steps that I go through when mixing vocals. Apply them to your mixes, see how it works. So first, let's take a listen and just see how the vocal sits here. And let's do the first step, which is setting the right level. Here we go. So I like this level for the mix, so I want the vocal to sit right on top of the mix here.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
So if you've looked at my 5-step mix guide, you know that one of the first steps we do after we set up the session is we do a static mix where we set the levels for everything. And that's also, that whole 5-step process is applicable to single tracks too, if you don't want to go big macro with it. First step here, let's set the level for this vocal. Before we reach for the compressor or anything else, it's just a little quiet, so let's turn it up. So the fader is already at 0. So for me, when the fader's at 0, rather than push it up, I like to push up the gain at the top. It's just a thing I do. I don't like to move the fader a whole lot. And if I have to go like this to get the volume, guess what? I can't go any higher, and that's annoying. And if I have to bring the fader way down here because it's too loud, then that's annoying to have the fader way down there. So I leave it at 0. I'm going to increase the trim here to get that level closer to where I want it to be. You could also do the same thing by just adjusting the actual volume of the audio file itself. Same difference.
You are so much more than words upon the screen. I wish you would believe that you're a masterpiece.
Okay, from a volume standpoint, that sits a little bit better. We turned it up about 2.5 dB. Could probably go a little bit louder, we'll see. Compression's gonna change that a little bit, but that's a better volume to start with. We can hear the vocal. Now let's listen to it by itself for a second and take some mental notes, or you can even write them down on a piece of paper, of what you hear. What needs to change with this vocal to make it sound finished?
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
First, let me address something. Some people are going to leave a comment that says something along the lines of, and I know this because I used to think this all the time, this vocal already sounds good, it's easy to mix. Show me how to mix a bad sounding vocal, bro. I hear you, but listen to what you're saying, right? You're saying the reason my vocals don't sound bad is because Joe hasn't taught me better vocal mixing tips, when actually the reason is your vocal recordings don't sound very good. So invest the time getting a good sounding vocal. Now, newsflash, this was recorded with this microphone. This is a Roswell Mini K47 $300 mic. You don't need an $8,000 mic to get a good sounding vocal. I think I did run it through my nice tube preamp, but I've done plenty. Folks who are in my recording course right now have heard I did the entire course through the stock preamps on my Presonus interface, and it sounded great. So part of it is this is just what my voice sounds like. Part of it is getting a good performance. Part of it is getting nice and close to the mic, but not too close, and coaxing out a good performance. So before you disregard what I'm going to tell you saying, well, my vocals sound bad, therefore I just need to find a better tutorial, step back for a second and think maybe it's my recording that needs to get better. Maybe you need to work with mic placement. Maybe you've got too much room in your recording and you need to put up some treatment. Check out my latest studio tour video for more on how I set up my room to make the vocal sound a little bit drier. And then obviously just play with the distance. When you get a little closer, it sounds a little warmer. So that's my disclaimer statement here. But when I listen to this vocal, I hear it's big and warm, which is great by itself, but once we start adding in instrumentals, it starts to sound a little muddy, with the vocal.
You are so much more.
So that much more down in those frequencies, it's a little much. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take those frequencies and balance them. How do we balance them? We grab an EQ. Just regular, any EQ will do. Let's take a look at the thing. You'll see
You are so.
there's a buildup right here. We can see right there. Granted, that's the note I'm singing, but there's also just a buildup here. So general rule of thumb, let's solo the vocal. And let's first do a high-pass filter just to get rid of any rumble.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
And it's important here, I don't want to get rid of this frequency. I just need it to be turned down a little bit. I still want some warmth. So I'm going to grab this low mid band, make sure I find the frequency that's offending me, and pull it down. Not out, just down. You're not down and out, you're just down.
You are so much more.
Right in there, right at just under 200 hertz. Let's pull that down.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
You can still feel those frequencies there. Shut up. You can still feel the frequencies there, but they're not as pronounced. So when I put it back on top of the guitar and the vocal, when I put it back on top of the mix with the thick bass and guitar parts, the vocal sits a little bit better on top.
You are so much more.
Much more. It has this still a little bit of a hint of warmth, but it's not this that was there before. That was kind of the star of the show. Now what do we hear? Well,
you are so much more.
I'm pretty happy with that tone. I could use a little more air, a little more crispy top end. So I'm going to do a boost. For me, air starts roughly around 8K and up. So I'm going to take my high frequency and just go boink somewhere up in here and just see if I can add some air without messing the vocal too much, messing it up too much.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
If you get it high enough, you get mostly just that nice sound on, like when I sing more and you hear kind of a top end frequency thing there. If you put the frequency high enough, then it won't enhance the S's and T's as much as it would if this was down here at like 5K. But up here at like, it's about 15K, but you can see the frequencies are reaching down. I mean, it's boosting starting at about 7 or 8K and more as it goes up, almost like a shelf. But down here where the frequencies are, it's not being affected too much, which is good. A lot of people might come in here and boost at 5K, and all that does is make those sibilant sounds just annoying, like this.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
That went through. A, I have a gap in my teeth that makes that frequency come out a little bit more anyway. But B, that's not a really pleasant frequency to boost on vocals most of the time. Instead, we're boosting up here. I mean, you could even go all the way up here and just make it nice and wide. A lot of mastering folks will do something like that to keep the slope nice and cool. But somewhere right around here feels pretty good to me.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
And now, to me, it feels a little tiny bit like we've taken care of the low mids, we've taken care of some highs. There's a little bit to my ear where the vocal and the piano, so the piano and the electric guitar have very similar warm tones. Vocal is going to occupy some of those frequencies as well. I'm hearing that more in the 500 hertz range. Listen to how the vocal and the piano and the electric guitar are kind of all hanging out in the same spot. I want the vocal to be a little thinner there. Take a listen.
You are so much more.
Let me boost that on the vocal so you can hear it.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
So it's in that area, that's like the hollow area. That's the frequencies you hear when I start singing like this. You hear that mid-range, right? Not the low mids where it's like, whoa, whoa, but in here where it's kind of honky sort of sounding. And I want to pull that down a little bit. And what ends up happening when you do this on drums, they sound a little tighter. When you do it on vocals, they can sound a little more distinct, a little more character. There's a tightness that comes with it as well. Let me solo the vocal while I cut this so you can hear what it sounds like.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
Just some clarity that comes in. And I didn't have to boost highs to do that. I took out some of the mids where just a lot of extra stuff is happening. Now listen to it in context of everything else.
You are so much more.
If you hear this and you say, Joe, that's too thin, I would encourage you, go listen to some pop music. Like that specifically pop music, you'll hear the vocals that are coming out today, whether you like pop music or not, you can agree that when you listen, they're pretty bright. They don't have a lot of big, huge, AEA ribbon microphone, boomy vocal sounds like you may have liked back in the 60s. It's a lot more tight and a lot brighter. It's not too sibilant. They toe that line really well, but it sounds more like this. Let's bypass the EQ so you can hear the raw vocal, nice and warm. It's the thing we want out of a vocal, but in the mix, we got to tame some of that warmth to get it to sit in the mix better. So here it is without EQ, and then I'll flip the EQ back on.
You are so much more. You are so much more.
So you immediately hear the higher frequencies. Your first thought is, at least mine is, hey, that's brighter. And that's true. But listen to the difference. If we just leave the high boost, but we don't do any of the low stuff that we did, it doesn't work as well. So when you're thinking, hey, that's a high boost, that should also trigger you to think, well, maybe that's also some cuts that's making room for those highs. Here's what it sounds like with just the high boost and none of the other cuts.
You are so much more.
See what it did? We get the clarity, we get that air. It's still there. The air's still there, but we're still getting that woo is still there. We haven't solved the problem by boosting highs. We also need to go in and tame those lows and mids. Which one was it? This one? Yeah. And now, to me, this is a very nice EQ sound for the vocal.
You are so much more.
At this point, you're saying, Joe, if we have to listen to that line one more time, I'm going to punch the computer screen. So let's move to a different line.
Wish you would believe that you're a masterpiece.
Okay, so that's EQ. I've got the vocal sounding tone-wise, how I want it to sound. I've balanced the different frequency ranges. That feels good to me. Now we can do something like compression. So let's add compression. What this is going to do is tighten up the dynamic because I'm singing, you are so much more. I'm singing so loud and quiet, especially when it gets to the chorus. And we want to tame that down. Also, the sound of a lead vocal typically is the sound of compression. So we need that in there. I'm going to use the standard compressor in Studio One just to show you don't really need fancy stuff. I'm going to go fast on the attack, 1 millisecond attack, 30 millisecond release, and pull the threshold down and just see what happens.
Wish you would believe that you're a masterpiece. Don't believe the lies. You are so much more than words upon the screen. Wish you would believe that you're a masterpiece.
You hear what that compressor is doing? It's everything, the breath sounds are a little louder, so when I go, you hear that more, and that's part of the tone that we're looking for. And then it just sounds a little bit like someone's choking me in a nice way. The sibilance is, it's just everything's a little squished and a little tighter. Now it may be a little too bright, so what I would do in this situation is I would come after the compressor and maybe bring those highs back down a little bit. Let's just see.
You are so much more than words upon the screen. Wish you would believe that you're a masterpiece. Don't believe the lies.
Now, one thing that's coming out to me, and you could do that EQ before the compressor. I kind of like to do it after, sometimes for fun. Now the only thing is on believe.
Don't believe.
that frequency comes jumping out. The compressor's helping that jump out. Let's go find it. It's going to be around 2K.
Don't believe the lies.
Yep. There it is. Gross. It's about 2.5K. I'm going to make that real narrow and just pull it down. Listen to how it smooths out the vocal.
Don't believe the lie. Don't believe the lie.
And that might be it. Like, I think it's easy to say, okay, I'm not liking it, and to say, let me slap this on there. Okay, that's a little better. Let me slap this other plugin, another, and another. And all these plugins can add some cool stuff, but they can also add problems. And you end up doing more than you need to do, and you end up shooting yourself in the foot. This is a lot of times, what I do when I mix my vocals. And this might be the end of it. And I might say, you know what? Last thing I want, since this is a ballad, I want to use my patented plate reverb sound right here. And so I'll send a little bit of the vocal to this big, ginormous plate reverb, just to have a little bit there.
Don't believe the lies that say you're not enough.
And then that might be my vocal mix.
You are so much more than words upon the screen.
Okay, so maybe it needs a little bit of de-essing to tame those upper frequencies. That's no big deal. I'm going to use just the de-esser preset on the Personas compressor to tame those. So there's a de-esser preset, which means it's just listening to frequencies above 6K. So this compressor is listening to this, and it's going to compress when those sounds get too loud. So let's just pull that back until something happens.
You are so much more than words. You are so much more. You are so much more. You are so much more. You are so much more.
And just like that, instead of putting 12 plugins and duplicating the vocal and having all these things and thinking on paper I can tell you with a white paper why all this makes sense, what if you just use an EQ to get the tone how you wanted, added compression to squeeze that tone a little bit, EQ'd the compressed signal for the frequencies that are now a little more accentuated, like a little bit of the highs and that upper mid-range, and then if the compressor brought out some sibilants, throw a de-esser on at the end so that those S's and T's aren't too pronounced, but you maintain that high frequency boost that we put in at the beginning. It may sound complicated. Maybe the fact that I'm acting like this is simple and you're over there going, boy, I don't even know what this guy just did. Believe me, there are plenty of people who would love to overcomplicate this and who would cross their arms and say, well, if you only got 3 or 4 plugins on there, you're not really mixing. I would disagree. This is just with simple stock plugins. I would do it maybe even faster using like Fat Channel with analog style EQs and compressors. The point being, don't overthink it, don't overdo it, and have a process. Maybe this process isn't exactly what you want, but if you don't have a process, you need one. So start like I did. Get the level right first before a plugin. EQ it to get the tone right. Then compress it. Then if there are any other problems you need to fix those problems. Add a little effects like the reverb on a send and move on. All right, that's it for this video. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, do all the things, share it with your uncle who's into mixing as well. And be sure to check out my 5-step mix guide. This goes through my mixing process. We've talked about like on the macro level, but this is like a macro how to approach your mix every time to make sure you stay on track and get it finished. You can have that for free at 5stepmix.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.